So joining us on the panel today are Professor Gill Cauhey, the Associate Director for ROSA, the Register for Senior Australians at SAHMRI. So welcome, Gillian. Jasmin Mazis, the Patient Engagement Project Officer at ANZ Data at SAHMRI. Welcome. Dr Maria Alejandra Pinero de Plaza, a research fellow at the Caring Futures Research Institute at Flinders University. So welcome. And Rae Plush, Project Manager, Consumer and Community Engagement at the Women's and Children's Health Network. Welcome, Rae. So I'm going to hand over to the panel members now to briefly introduce the areas of research or work where they engage with consumers and where they undertake evaluation activities for a bit of context. So you can all have 2 to 3 minutes for your introductions, and why don't we start with Gill?
Thank you. Thank you, and it's really lovely to be here today. So I'm the Associate Director at the Registry of Senior Australians, otherwise known as ROSA, and our registry links all aged care data to other types of health service utilisation data. So medicines data, hospitalisations data, national dex registry data, immunisation registry data, sorry. And so we've actually able to build a comprehensive overview of the ageing pathway for people once they enter aged care. So when we're talking about aged care, it includes people in residential aged care homes, receiving home care packages or home care supports. Our cohort currently is about 3.4 million people that have ever received aged care services. And so we do quantitative data analysis where we actually look at use of services as an example, characteristics of the people and outcomes associated with this service risk, service use. One of the strengths of ROSA, we were established in 2017, is that we're a multidisciplinary team that brought together 3 different organisations, including 3 universities, aged care providers, and importantly, consumer representatives and consumer representative organisations. So embedded with, since the conception of ROSA has been very much having consumers at the forefront of everything we do. We have a consumer and community committee. We meet every quarter. And we've actually had to just in the last year expand it to 12 members with the growing team and the growing activities. And one of the things that I think has been really important is that we embed the consumers in everything that we do. So throughout the whole research life cycle, their voice is there at the start. That's their ideas often. It's in the protocols, it's in writing grants, it's in how to interpret the analyses that we have, and then importantly, that next step in terms of dissemination and appropriate dissemination methods. So I'll just stop there for the moment.
Thanks very much, Gill. And now to Jasmin.
Thank you. So I think I've just first better say that I'm not actually a researcher. I'm in a really lucky position actually as a patient engagement officer. My job is to bring researchers and consumers together. So it's quite a great role. And I work at ANZ Data, so we're part of SAHMRI and we're a registry as well, just like ROSA. And my job is to work with consumers in lots of different areas actually. So what we focus on is chronic kidney disease, and I'm supported by a grant called BCKD. This is a grant that covers across Australia and has a network of different clinicians and researchers and consumers across Australia, and that network now is about 300 strong. And so my role in that is, again, getting consumers involved in research, getting them to look at research education, getting them to review different educational modules, lots of different things, and then At ANSTARTA, we have lots of different pockets of consumers embedded within our work. So we've got a lot of focus groups, we've got a lot of surveys that we do, we have working groups. We've just started this year a consumer advisory panel. So I help manage and I don't chair, but I help manage and organise that panel. And we have at the moment 11 consumers, soon to be 13 consumers. We're growing as well. And that's because we cross Australia and New Zealand. So we've got a couple of people from New Zealand and we're trying to get as many people across Australia. So the numbers are growing, which makes it a bit tricky, trying to get everyone's voices heard. But then in addition to that, we've got lots of other kind of consumer groups, and you heard from Pregnancy Kidney Research Australia today, so they come under the banner of ANSTARTA as well. So I do a lot of work for them and help, you know, minute their meetings and things. We've got one tomorrow, and yeah, so there's a lot going on in the ANSTARTA space. And we've got a really great team that are really engaged in consumer engagement, which makes it really easy.
I think SAHMRI gave me a lot of passion and strategies to understand the importance of embedding consumer engagement with research. Then in 2019, I started as a research fellow at Flinders University, Caring Futures Institute, knowledge translation, measuring care in different contexts, including aged care. And I brought several of my consumer fellows to my projects, which I cannot say they are my projects. Basically, they were their projects, their ideas. And we managed to get some grants. And for instance, one of the projects is about frail, homebound, and bedridden people in Australia, how they are not supported, they don't even receive telehealth. So we did a problem identification study, gigantic, with 300 people. We collected their experiences. We published all this data during COVID-19. The World Health Organization actually disseminated one of those publications as the knowledge around the field. And we have other projects where we are quantifying and evaluating not only the consumer engagement factor, but the partnership itself. So we quantify that with taking into consideration all the stakeholders. So I work with RapidXAI, which is the implementation of artificial intelligence to predict the probability of myocardial infarction when you get to emergency department. And I am evaluating there the impact of this implementation from the consumer perspective, from the clinician's perspective, from the so this is happening right now across these several hospitals, and we also use artificial intelligence to predict and understand these patterns. So there are other projects around aged care. We work with several aged care facilities. We have published in journals and book chapters with consumers where they tell the story, but especially interpret findings. Because one thing is for us as researchers, wearing our researcher hat, using the evidence and what we think is right. And another thing is what they see, and it's so relevant because it goes beyond the traditional models addressing care. So it's about the journey, it's about the holistic experience. So and there are other projects that I'm happy to talk about to you guys after.
Wonderful, and Ray.
Thanks, Nadia. I too am not a researcher, so phew, everyone. So I work for the Women's and Children's Health Network in a position around consumer and community engagement. And I guess one of the aspects I'm going to speak to today in our questions is what we've done in regards to reviewing and developing co-design of our consumer advocate metric tool to evaluate the experience of consumer advocates in relation to their role and contribution. So within the Women's and Children's Health Network, we have around 110 consumer advocates that actively contribute to the design, delivery and evaluation of services. So we've got to showcase a number of them up here today, sharing their experiences across the network. And our network undertakes an annual evaluation of consumer advocates' experience previously with a focus on experience of contribution, personal satisfaction and resources to support. One of the things that we found is that whilst we evaluate that, is that there's been focus more so around perhaps satisfaction rather than experience. And also I attended or had the opportunity to participate in a workshop through HTSA and our Consumer Engagement Action Group around making change, visible change efforts to advance social participation in health. And as a result of that, notice that when we do talk about or evaluate the experience of consumer advocates about their contribution to the network, is also learning a little bit more about from their perspective. So we talk about from a systems perspective, we've evaluated that, but from an individual perspective, has that happened? So the evaluation I'm going to talk to in the questions after, as part of this panel, is looking at how we've aligned our current evaluation tool against that, and in particular looking at the experience of consumer advocates in line with our person and family centred care principles. And part of the outcome of us evaluating that is to then inform and design and also direct support and training for staff around how the ways in which they can engage and support consumer advocates in their consumer engagement journey within the network to make sure that we support them.
Wow, what a fantastic panel we have here today. So you're in for a treat. Evaluation is a very important and often a tricky topic in the context of consumer engagement. So I know I'm really looking forward to hearing the advice and insights from our wonderful panel members today. So I have a question for each of you before we open up for Q&A to the audience. So feel free to take your time, about up to 5 minutes to answer the question. So I'll start with you, Gill. How do you define successful community engagement in research, and what key indicators or metrics do you use to evaluate it?
Thanks, Nadia. That's a really great question. And to be honest, at Rosa, it was only a couple of years ago that we did our first evaluation, just through a survey. At that time, we had 8 community members about their involvement in Rosa. And I think it was to sort of understand how they felt being part of our committee, if they felt they were being listened to, engaging in the research, if they're making a difference. And one of the things that we really wanted to understand, and I heard someone talking about this morning as well, is about, is it making a difference for the consumers themselves? So I feel like it's not just a one-way take. It's, are we really, helping the consumers? And our consumer engagement committee has a majority of older people as well that have lived experiences in caring or for people in aged care services. And so it was really important for us to understand that we actually are appropriately, returning to them. And over the time and over our journey, we've learned a lot. And I think, in the early days, it was really hard for us to even get a consumer to be part of our grant. So we really felt like they needed to be part of our team in order to be heard. And I think the first time we did that, the research officer said, "You can't do that." And we're like, well, this is what we want to do, And I think, even in the last couple of years, 4 years, 5 years, there's been an increased awareness of the need to actually have consumers as part of that research journey. So it really is consumer informed throughout the life cycle. And I think, from our consumer, we don't just have a consumer committee. We also have them involved in activities in terms of dissemination of our findings. So I'm sure you're all familiar, we write these wonderful academic papers, but most people are never going to read them, and and why would you, to be honest? But it's really important for us to make sure that we get our message out there to empower consumers to be able to understand questions to ask their GP, for instance, or questions to ask their aged care providers about appropriate supports or services. So I think, that was something that's been really important in terms of then developing appropriate material, appropriate language. And so now we've moved towards developing infographics, which are really quite lovely summaries, one page, and increasingly now a lot of the academic journals are including them as part of the outputs now. So I think there's been a real increase in awareness about that appropriate communication. Interestingly, we did a study, a partnership with CODA SA called The Plug-in, where we actually went to and spoke to people in aged care services to find out how they want to receive the information about the research that's being done in this space. And it was, really interesting. It's great that we've got all online web versions of this and that, but many of the people, the older people in aged care, don't have access to an iPad or a computer or the web. So increasingly that was important. It's like, well, how do we get our message across? And so it's, developing those sort of multi-pronged strategies within having sort of the lay summaries. And I don't mean lay sort of, to dumb it down. It's just, for me, one of the things is about creating that simple language for people to understand. And we do the same when we talk to policy advisors and when we want policy change. So when we go to Canberra, they don't want to read these 12-page academic journals. Just tell me in, a Twitter line feed almost, it's, that brief. And so, across everything that we do now, it's really important that that communication is really targeted to the audience. And within that, it's either, do we go to the media so they read about it in the newspaper? Is it just a little notice put up in the GP practice, that they might sit and read while they're a fly or something while they're waiting for their appointment? So, I think that's something that we really learn in our journey, and that's something that we also get our consumers to help advise. Like, to me, when I say I do a lot of work around people with multiple chronic conditions, it's multimorbidity, and the consumers are like, well, it sounds a bit bad, it's just multiple chronic conditions. So it's about learning appropriate languages and being mindful of that. They're very passionate, I should say, about, the pictures of older people with the walking stick. She's like, none of us have a walking stick, so why are you using a picture with someone with a walking stick? And I'm like, excellent point. So it's really those little things that are really important in terms to help make the research more impactful in terms of how we convey our research findings. And I just want to share a story, if I can be indulged. One of the things that we've set up at Rosa, and which is something that I'm really quite proud of, is our early career researchers, our PhD students, to have them paired with a consumer advisor throughout the whole of their research journey when they're with us. So it really helps to ensure that when you're thinking of an idea, you talk to the consumer and say, is this something that's important? We sit here in this beautiful building, but we can think of a whole range of things to do the research on. But if it's not important to older people, it's not going to impact on their health and well-being, then it really is meaningless. So it's about having that engagement, and then just having that. So it sets up, and I sort of do the first introduction, and then they meet every couple of months, and it's just the consumer advisor and the PhD student or the postdoc, and they just have a chat about the research. And the older consumer advisors, they say, I feel like I'm just chatting away, but it's so meaningful and so valuable to the researchers, and it's something that they really value. And it's been just such a lovely thing to witness this, and because it really is just a very close collaboration. So it really is quite wonderful to have watched over the last 18 months evolve. And I think just a story about one of the consumers and the early career researchers is from another country, and one of the consumers said, well, his consumer mentor said, well, I've never had Ethiopian food. He's like, well, you better come around to my house for some Ethiopian food. So her and her husband went around, and he's got 2 young children, and they sat together and ate a meal together and, talked about life and the research. And it was just a really lovely tale. And it was something that I only actually found out about a couple of months ago when his consumer advisor's husband passed away from Parkinson's disease. And he went to the funeral. Him and his wife went to the funeral because they had met there and they had this connection, and it was just a really a powerful way of sort of that, it's not just about consumer engagement. This was really consumer collaboration. It's a partnership that we've sort of developed here. And I think, the consumer, obviously she gets so much out of it, but for the early career researcher, it's been a wonderful journey for him. So I just wanted to share that sort of, lovely story.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, Jean. And it really, just really nicely highlights the connection that occurs when the partnerships are working well. And I thought it was really interesting that in your evaluation, you sought to gather feedback from the consumers on whether the process, like how is it meeting their needs? Is it meeting their needs? Which is certainly something we've heard a lot discussed today. So it really just shows the maturity in your consumer engagement approach. I want to move to Ray. So you're from the Women's Health, Women's and Children's Health Network. That's correct. Just had a mental blank then. I should have said WCHN. And your focus is a lot more on the community partnerships, isn't it? So I wanted to ask you, what are some strategies that you use for gathering feedback from your community partners to continuously improve your community partnerships?
Thanks, Nadia, and thanks, Julie. It's a lovely segue to, I guess, talking about what we've done, because you talked about the process, and I guess one of the strategies I want to talk to Nadia, and I think just for the purpose of when I was preparing for this question, is that for the purpose of these community partners, are referred to as consumer advocates. And just to give that context of our 110 consumer advocates, which are carers and consumers accessing our service, but they're in that role as a consumer advocate. And part of it for us, which is that step further than what you were talking about, Dylan, was taking a step back to go and develop a metric tool to actually measure consumer advocates' experience, and to do that in co-design. So that's the evaluation process that we've undertaken over the last 12 months to develop that metric tool. It closed, I think, Monday or Tuesday. So I'm just pulling together the results from consumer advocates about their experience. But I guess the strategy around that is that we started by doing expression of interest out to our 110 consumer advocates to say, would you like to be a part of a focus group to discuss what's important to you if you are a consumer advocate, and how will we know that we've done that well? So that they develop the actual metric tool. As I highlighted before previously, we do the survey's done annually, and we ask questions based on personal satisfaction, but we want to move it up a bit to go around experience and base that and align it against person and family centred care principles, because we want, as a network, we are passionate about making sure that any consumer or carer that accesses our service is that you're treated with respect and dignity. This is an expectation that we want for people to experience. You're treated with respect and dignity, that you're listened to, that you understand what's going on, and that you're part of your shared decision making, and it's done in a kind and thoughtful way. So that's our expectation as a network. That's what we want. So if you come in, we want to be able to measure that. So let's flip it and make sure that we're doing that with consumer advocates' experience. When they're sitting around a table on a safety and quality meeting, Joel, just look at you chairing one of our consumer advisory groups, sitting on CAC, our Care and Consumer Advisory Committee. Anywhere, we want to make sure that we actually replicate those principles in that place for consumer advocates. We're doing it well with consumers, generally speaking, in capturing that, but how do we make sure that we do that in the space for our consumer advocates? So I was fortunate, we have very honoured with the consumer advocates that put up their hand to get involved in our network, very, very privileged to walk with people around that. And from the group, we had 9 consumer advocates register interest to participate in the focus group. So we brought them together and asked some questions around that systems levels. As a consumer advocate, what do you want to see? What would you like to see? If we're actually doing this well, what do you want us to see? So we captured that. And then we went to the questions around individual level, which is that resource I spoke about before. I've got it over on my desk. my desk, on the table. And the questions drawn out from that was, what ways can we measure that you as a consumer advocate felt listened to? So what would you see? What would you want to see? And how would that be represented or reflected in your experience? So being able to say, hey, I'm a consumer advocate and this is what I want to see. So then we can set that as a benchmark. It's not about satisfaction, it's about we expect as a network you feel respected. How would that look? And let's design what that question might look like for you so that it makes sense to you. And then we also looked at what ways can we measure that your effort has been made was fair and useful. And I really like this word fair and useful because from my experience as a human on this world, but also from listening and having the opportunity to walk with people, is around that when you give feedback or you're involved in something, we need to make sure that it's fair and useful. It's not, I've asked you to do something, but actually it wasn't fair that I asked you to do that. And actually want to contribute, it's not actually useful. So how do we make sure we do that really respectfully? So again, what would you like to see? These are the questions we pulled out from the focus group, and how would you like that to be represented or reflected? And then we themed those up. So as you can imagine, you know, our annual survey previously might have been about 15 questions. You can imagine this was up to about 45. Fantastic. Anyone in this room that fills in the survey, you start to lose a little bit of interest, you know, after maybe 15. So what we wanted to do was then we pulled out, themed against those questions into statements, and then went back collectively back into the network. So the 9 consumers supported, the consumer advocates supported the wording around the statements, and then we themed them against, are these around respect and dignity? Are these around shared decision making? Are these about listening and communication? Also at a systems level for what staff are doing to support what the resources in place and what's happening for you, but also what would you like to see as a consumer advocate? How has your participation as a consumer advocate impacted on the health of you, your family, your community, and what has that meant for you, so that we can do a bit of a metric tool. So it's a very beginning phase. So what we did was, because there were so many questions, we then went out, took the questions and broke them up into different areas. And we have once a month, we do a communities of practice, which a number of consumer advocates chime in. So I'd have 15 minutes for people to rate. Out of the 10 we've got here, which ones of these mean something to you? And then we landed on the top 6. Right, so then we might go to a consumer huddle so different groups of consumers were able to sort of give us some feedback about just generally where they landed. So we landed on putting together the metric tool, as I call it, and we had the option from strongly agree, neutral to disagree, strongly disagree, and we've also got a not appropriate, because we put this out there and like I said, closed on Monday, is that if there's a number that there's an NA, that means that statement probably maybe doesn't sit. So why are we asking or measuring it? But it might have sat for some people. So just to keep that in the back of our mind. In regards to the questions we asked specifically around your individual for a consumer advocate, is we wanted to learn about the consumer advocate. By being a consumer advocate, has it increased their confidence to navigate the healthcare system? So as a consumer advocate, has this happened? Has it increased your knowledge of the healthcare system? And also, has it increased your passion to be involved as a consumer advocate, so that we can get a little bit more granular about what it's meant for consumer advocates? So the new questions that we've implemented are around 3 key areas: your contribution, resources to provide support, and then personal contribution, and we've aligned them. So this, I guess, is the strategy we've used at the moment to, I guess, evaluate the impact for consumer advocates around their experience, to then inform, to continually inform and improve the partnerships that will happen broadly across the network. So I'll just dob you in, Celia, for the moment, is that what we would do is that we have this audit, this metric tool that comes out, and then Celia with CAMS, is that Celia might go, actually, I want to take 7 of those questions from our resource and put it out to my elect committee just to check in where we're at. So because there's 6 or 7, it means that people can be honest, but it also might give you some feedback about, hang on, actually, we need to do this better about making sure that we've got an agenda item that allows time for consumer advocates to speak up. So we're hoping that it will then inform and change and build that culture around ways in which staff engage with consumer advocates to develop the partnerships that do the continuous improvement. I pulled out the data last night and it's sitting over there. There are two questions we ask is, do you feel your contribution is making a change? And I think it was around 82% of consumer advocates that strongly agree. So I'm just, because it's sitting over there. Oh, thanks, Michelle. Oh, you're a superstar. Look at this. Don't mind me. I'll just, get weighted on something. It's something we pray. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I feel I am making a difference. Yes, no, or maybe. And 81% had said yes, they feel they're making a difference. And then I see the outcomes of my contribution in changes and improvements is 70% or 71% said yes, and 23% said maybe. So, that's a point for us as a system to look at consumer advocates, what their experience is, but also then how that can translate. So I'll be quiet.
Impressive. Are you sure you're not a researcher, Ray? I don't know, you're fooling me. A few things I took from that were quite interesting. So you co-designed the evaluation strategy. You aligned what you were asking about with your organisational values and principles. And then the questions are really looking at different levels of impact, which then can be used to inform changes that the organisation makes. So it's really very, very clever and very interesting. So I hope everyone's taking notes. That's quite an impressive strategy. So now to Maria Alejandra. Question for you is, are there specific benchmarks or standards that you use to evaluate the effectiveness of your consumer partnership initiatives in research?
Thank you. Love the question, and love the question after this presentation, because as you heard, it's very difficult to design an evaluation, and it's very difficult to design something that is transferable, generalizable, and applicable. And when you work in these areas, you will find three schools of thoughts. You'll find people thinking about systems and how they work together. So particular elements and, let's say, policymakers, how they connect with consumers, how that impacts into health funding, how researchers receive the funding. So that's very complex, and there are several methods to do that. And you consider the consumers, but then you're missing a lot. Then you have the social aspects. Most of our research is about that. So the connection, empowerment, the voice of the consumer. And this is what we love. What happened with that is that it's beautiful, meaningful for a specific context, in a specific group, and you cannot bring that to other areas. And you feel like almost powerless, because you say, this is so important. But then they will say, and it's good for them, but how about these others? And maybe it doesn't work here. So then the third school of thought is more like the Rosa style. That is to get a lot of data about these things, find significant trends and patterns, and then say, okay, this is important, and this is how we go. So that was a challenge for us. We wanted to do all of that. We wanted to have the meaningful impact. We wanted to have all these factors involved. And we, for 3 years, we published this year, this is published in Frontiers Health Services in March. It's called Co-Designing, Measuring and Optimizing Innovations and Solutions within Complex Health Systems. And the nickname is Proliferate. And it's a method that does that. So we face all the challenges that you face, and we thought, how can we ask something, and to whom, that we can understand the systems, the social components, and the ecology. And what's the common factor? We have the consumers across all these things. And how do we provide feedback? Whether we understand something, if we like it, if we see barriers to it, if there is a motivation to uptake this thing, and your own perspectives, your recommendations. And on top of that, you have your socio-demographic characteristics, so basically all connected to the social determinants of health. So we thought we should measure this, and these should be our metrics, but they change depending on the context. So let's say the procedure, every evaluation has a process and a focus. So the focus is these 5 constructs. The process is partnership. We all have a place in the table. We all have voice. We all co-decide from the beginning. And when I say we all, it's consumers, it's policymakers, it's educators, it's researchers, and this is called transdisciplinary research. So it's not like different disciplines saying something. It's uniting all this together to create something that goes beyond discipline specific. So that's the logic. You use your proliferate constructs, the 5 that I mentioned, and you set up a benchmark. So you design, okay, under this context, with this population, how do we know that they understand what we're doing? And when I say they, it's not just consumers, clinicians, technicians, educators, researchers, so you get the system view and the types, because you have different types of consumers, and your reference group, this transdisciplinary group, interprets these results. So you capture kind of their hypothesis. My point of view, let's say, as a consumer advocate, is about diet. Let's say diet is important. Okay, your hypothesis is if we understand this and we go over this benchmark, then we are successful. So you can do that with the process of the partnership, with a product, with a therapy, with anything that you're doing. So we created that. And with that, we benchmark, and then we interpret results together based on our own hypothesis and design strategies adapted to the system level, the person level, the group level, and all the levels. So that's proliferate. It took us 3 years, consumers, clinicians, around 15 people co-designing this method. And it was published, like I said, around a special edition in science implementation, and all the most smart people in the world that have no comparison to my experience. Actually, it's the most referenced, the most visited, the most downloaded. So I'm happy to work with you and use this system to measure your impacts and effects and help you demonstrate your contribution to health.
Thank you so much. How helpful is that? I think having some key constructs to focus on, because it helps to overcome some of that initial complexity, setting benchmarks, interpreting that information and using that information. So that gives us a really nice process to follow. So thank you. And I'm sure we'll all be checking out your paper very soon. Thank you for sharing that, Jasmin. Can you share some examples of key findings or insights that have emerged from the evaluation of consumer partnership in research, leading to meaningful changes or adaptations in projects?
So it's probably a hard question for me to answer because I haven't actually been involved in evaluating any research or anything like that. So it's a bit of a tricky one. I guess I would say just at the moment, and my answer will be a lot more shorter than everybody else's, is that we're working on lots of different projects and we're still in the heart of the project. So we haven't actually evaluated the end result. But we are evaluating as we're going along and we're getting continuous consumer feedback as we go along. So I think that's one of the most important things. Like at the moment, we're creating consumer education modules and they're for consumers to encourage consumers. Basically what they are, they're for consumers to help consumers gain more confidence and experience and become, a little bit more able to work with researchers and know what they need to know to work with researchers. And so the consumers have led this and they are helping us write it. And then we will do a little bit of the work and we'll send them a little bit of the information, then we'll get their feedback. But whilst we're doing that about the actual project and getting information and feedback on the project, we've actually been sending them surveys and actually chatting to them one-on-one about how they've felt during the process as well. So not asking just about do these words look good, or does the website look good? And asking them questions like, have you felt respected? Do you feel like we're listening to you? Do you feel heard? So we're getting that feedback as we're going along, so we can change the way we're working with them if we're not doing the right thing. And that's been really good. And we've got another workshop coming up where we're all going to get together and do it together. But yeah, it's been good. So it'll be good to see that come along. And I'm going to steal that idea of then getting them to come up with the evaluation with us, because to be honest, I probably would have just written it myself and given it to them. So I think we'll do that now, get them to help us write the evaluation and help evaluate it together, which would be great.
Well, that's fantastic, and it's great that already just in the panel there's been some sharing of ideas. So fantastic. So now it's open to questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question or comment for our fabulous panel members? Over here, Tony.
Thank you. Just a brief comment and then a question. I was very lucky to be on the Zoom panel sort of workshop with Stephen Gilbert, who's the first sort of patient leader in Brisbane actually involved in helping to run the health service. And he made a comment that when it comes to health professionals and their culture, their behaviours, their assumptions and so on, he said that their culture eats policy for breakfast. What he's saying, in other words, was that they often, sometimes, in exceptions, run a roughshod over things that are put forward, and they often don't understand the culture of healthcare consumers, people with lived experience, and this, I think, remains a challenge to have to overcome. The question I have is also from him, was he was saying it's important to have experience and outcome measures, but what about being able to measure the change in relationship that occurs between people on a committee and the person that experienced the healthcare consumer on that committee, and using that as some form of measure of what the result has been, or assessment or evaluation of what the result has been, and no pressure that if somebody has ideas on how to change relationships.
Measuring change in relationships. Who would like to take that one?
I can pass it after to you, but I think the constructs that I talk about will help you to measure relationship or any other thing. So basically, but there is a level of matureness, let's say. I don't know if that word exists. The group has to be really mature. They have to have an understanding of share values, share ideas, and that needs training and preparation, not only for the consumers, for the clinicians, the whole group has to understand this, and they will be able to modify the relationship if that matureness exists. Same with the data that you're collecting about feedback from consumers. You can ask them if they were treated and ethically respected, etc. We have a framework for that. It's called the Fundamentals of Care Framework. That's great, and then what? You get that, and you get 80% felt this way, and so what? And that's where you need as well the consumers and the rest of the team say, well, this means that we have to do this now in this way. And that's the next step. So when we design something with consumers, we evaluate constantly with them. And from the beginning, the design has to establish the goals so that we can use this benchmarking process to see, okay, we achieved, here's where we're lacking. What are the strategies? Oh, you know about that. This is your hypothesis. Our data collection show us this. So how can we address this? And I think that's a system.
Did you want to? Yes.
No, I just wanted to say that it was such a great question. And I'm not as experienced, so I don't know if there are things out there to measure that. It's something that I talk about with my team a lot, not only just how do we measure those relationships, but also one of the things that our team often talk about is how do we know that what we're doing with these consumers, then they're going on to do bigger and better things, like how, so we run this little group called Kidney Bites, and it happens every month, and it's like a dip your toe in kind of education session where consumers can come online and they can speak to researchers, but it's for people that don't really have much experience and they're a bit nervous, and it's a really safe environment. But we have seen that some of those people that are attending those groups are now coming to workshops, and they're now going to focus groups and things, and then I don't think they would have done that before without it. But how are we actually collecting that to say that that grassroots thing has actually helped it? And we don't have a way to measure it at the moment. But it's interesting as well, your comment from the doctor too. We had a workshop last year which we ran over in Queensland, and we ran it here at SAHMRI, and we also ran it in Sydney, and we had over 110 researchers and consumers come together, and we asked a whole bunch of questions, and we drew out some themes about how consumers feel working with researchers. And one of the main themes was trust and safety. And kind of what you were saying just then, one of the things came up is that power play still exists, kind of like when you go to your doctor and your doctor says, well, you need to take this medication. Oh, okay, doctor, I'll take it. That still happens now. And that was one of the things that they really wanted to reinforce, that they needed to feel like they were on the same level. And also, I think it's been brought up a few times today, reinforcing that their opinion matters and that their lived experience is just as important. So we've taken that information in our team, and we then try and reinforce that and do that. But yeah, there's so much work you can do in this area. I reckon you can do a whole project on it as well. So yeah, it's a great question.
Thanks, Tony. Have a question over here.
I have quite a boring question. I've really enjoyed hearing about all of the different implementations of your consumer groups and the different contexts, the different sizes, the different ways you approach this evaluation. For groups large and small, so groups that are system-wide or groups that may be focusing on smaller areas and in different contexts like university research or NGO research or whatever, where do you embed these evaluation processes? Are they in terms of reference? Are they in onboarding? Like, what about the boring kind of procedural stuff?
Oh, great, Tony, great question. I thought Tony's question was fantastic. Great question too. It's a really, I think embedding it in governance is really important. And I know for Women's and Children's Health Network, we have a consumer engagement strategy, but we also have a procedure. And I'm mentally making this note because it's a really good question you posed. And my initial thinking is that it would sit within our procedure, that we make a commitment to annually, that continuous improvement around annually engaging and capturing feedback from consumer advocates around their experience. So from a very, if I've answered your question, a very boring, and only using that word because you've used it, is embedding it in your procedures and processes to do it. I think it's also about how we're very transparent, regardless of where you are, in that if that expectation, if you are onboarded as a consumer advocate, or is that we're going to ask you about your experience, and I see my bigger role is I manage the patient reported experience measure tool for WCHN, which is our survey, an audit survey, again, around consumers' experience, not consumer advocates, but consumers' experience of healthcare. And, that's embedded in our commitment around quality improvement, to ensure that we capture that and we look at that data and we do something about it. So I guess, yeah, in a procedure process, but also your onboarding and I guess expectations. And also very boring is in the role. So if you join a committee or whatever, please know that once a year we will ask you, you know, for your feedback, and that's about your active participation. That would be my take on it. Pass.
I don't really have much to add to that, but we are currently in the process of writing our terms of reference, our consumer advisory panel for ANS data. So it might be something that and it's not written because we're getting the consumers to write it with us. So we're doing it together at our next meeting, but that could be something that I raise with them, that should be in there. And how do we do that?
We are creating a new group of cardiac rehabilitation in the rural and remote areas, and we have people, 83 plus people already engaged in that process. And we are writing the terms of reference, but we are thinking of including the consumer letter of research. Have you heard of the different levels or type of involvement that you can have as a consumer? Offering them the opportunity to just provide general feedback, or perhaps taking the data analytics position, consumer scientists, you know, have you heard of that? Like offering, feeding data and information, or being a consumer co-researcher. And I think that's part of the values when you set up your consumer group. You say, well, we value you in this way, and therefore we measure that, but we are happy to get your expression in terms of what would you like to do with us and how. And that's part of our co-design process at the moment with that group. It's called Care Pulse.
Was there anything further from the panel on that? We have run out of time for questions, unfortunately, but that was a wonderful session, and please join me in thanking the panel members and also the audience for your great contribution and questions to this session. So a round of applause to panel members and you.